Welcome to the April Virginia Family Network Lunch and Learn. Today we are going to be sharing about resiliency and how to get there. I am sorry, I'm having a really hard time getting back to my PowerPoint and where I need to be. All right, I think I'm good now. So, again, we're going to be talking about kind of moving through crisis and how to be resilient and how that's not only helpful for ourselves to be able to do this, but how it's going to help our family as a whole and all of that's good stuff. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Nicole Anjum. I am the Virginia Family Network Program Assistant. So I'm sure anything you have to do with Virginia Family Network, you have seen me around. And we are joined today by Bianca Martin, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and kind of start us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca Martin. I am a parent with lived experiences, with all different types of experiences, but specifically with crisis. And I work as a peer recovery specialist in the community. I also support families either before, during, or after crisis. So speaking of that, this is a full disclaimer, we're going to be speaking about my lived experiences during a crisis. So we just wanted to take note about the possibilities of, some of these conversations that we're having could be activating and bring up some memories of your own lived experience. And I just want to make sure that you are aware of that before watching this. And then it's important that we create a calm space during this time, whether or not you're watching it now, where you're watching it later. We highly encourage you to either grab a cup of coffee or some tea, get cozy if possible. Remember to take some deep breaths, and then, have your self-care strategies on deck, just based on the topic of discussion today. And thank you for being here, by the way. We just did introductions.
We've done this and we are ready to move on.
All right, so what is resiliency? An ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. And that's from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And I love this vision or this image that Nicole found, and it has all these wonderful words that point out, what resiliency can look like. And I love the visual so much and how it just points to that. And so I appreciate you, Nicole, for finding that visual, because some of us are visual learners, so I appreciate that. And so we're going to be speaking mostly about resiliency during this lunch and learn. So in order for us to do that, though, we sort of do have to speak about the misfortune or change and the possibility of what that looks like. So we're going to sort of touch on that a little bit. So in order for you to build the resiliency, you must first have some type of challenge or crisis.
So when we're talking about mental health crisis, just what it is a mental health emergency. So it's when your child is going through some kind of danger where they're going to be hurting themselves. They could be possibly trying to hurt other people. They're having really disorganized thoughts or having really dangerous thoughts. Some of this can be things that you kind of know may come up due to a diagnosis that you may already have, or you may be really new to what's going on, and this is extra scary because you're not sure what's going on or where to start. And then a few other situations where you still want to kind of get some assessment to help your family kind of de-escalate situations. So, because all these feelings are really overwhelming and you're not sure what's going on or not. So we just kind of are pointing you in these new directions.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about lived experience, and just a quick note, for anyone that's interested in sharing your lived experience, either publicly or privately with direct service, a family support partner is a great way to be able to do that, to share your experience, but also to be able to support families. And so I got started in doing that 4 years ago. And so I've sort of been doing that since then. And it's really rewarding work. So I highly encourage you all, if you're interested, never heard of a family support partner, please look it up. As far as my personal story, we're going to focus a little bit on what happened as far as a crisis. And so a little backstory, my family consists of my husband, who I've been with for 18 years now, and my son, who started off in life as our nephew. And so this is and he's now 14 years old. This is a picture of us about 2 years ago. And I love this picture so much. It literally depicts our family. And so at the age of 5, our son was emergency removed from his home and placed in my husband and our home as a foster child. And so prior to moving in with us, he was exposed to an extreme amount of neglect and abuse, causing him to show signs of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And although he received several supports as a foster child, once we were awarded custody of him, all of those mental health support and services disappeared. Unfortunately, the social workers and others involved in this case did not provide us on ways and how to obtain supports as custodial parents of a kinship child. We also did not have proper training to support a child with such a traumatic history. During the span of those 5 years, our son's biological mom requested constant visitation, which we all thought was the right thing to do at the time. At that time, we did not know the ramifications that would have on our son long term. One summer week in 2019, our son spent a total of 5 nights with his biological mother overnight. And then the next day, our son appeared to be emotionally dysregulated to the degree he started to self-harm. At that time, he was only 10 years old. A situation occurred again in 2021 when he was 12. So the self-harming, suicidal ideations got to a degree of where my husband and I were no longer able to support him mentally. And then crisis was basically him starting to physically hurt himself, and came to us and said, he needed help. So that's basically the crisis that we experienced of and then we'll talk a little bit more shortly about the after the crisis, and then what happened next. So go ahead, Nicole.
So some questions to kind of think about. So are there gaps or challenges when receiving crisis support? And when your child's in crisis, what are some things you wish you had known prior to feel prepared? So we're just kind of going to keep these in mind, and hopefully throughout this Lunch and Learn, we'll answer these a little bit.
And I just want to point out that first question, the gap is specifically to foster to kinship. I mean, I don't know if that's something that families, that's like a more political, legislative, specific to obtaining supports and services with having a child in foster care, and then obtaining. I know our situation is a little bit more specific. Typically, when you go from custodial to adoption, it looks a little bit different. Or when you go from foster to custodian, it looks a little bit different. So those are some things to also consider, and everybody's story is different. And then when your child's in the crisis, just to speak on this question, what are some things I wish I'd known to feel better prepared? I would say, as a family support partner, I had worked with so many families that I sort of knew what to do. And we're definitely going to kind of go through a little timeline to discuss and have ideas on what we can do to better prepare ourselves.
Right. So knowing that knowledge is power.
What is a crisis and what it looks like in Virginia. So each community service board which is also known as the acronym CSB, is required by law to provide emergency mental health services for adults and children. Recently, additional funding has been provided for crisis response services for children for each region. Services vary from region to region, and I will also say county to county, but they include mobile crisis, crisis stabilization, and child psychiatry. Of course, emergency rooms, police, private hospitals, etc., also play a big, huge role in our crisis service system. So this is just like a little bit of, of information to show you, because prior to working in this field and having my son, I had no idea what the community services board looked like. I will say when you obtain supports and services within the CSB, especially for counseling services or therapy, you're automatically, at least in Fairfax County, Virginia, you're automatically assigned a psychiatrist. So if you have a therapist with the CSB, you also have a psychiatrist, and that was within our experience, which is great because it's kind of almost like a one-stop shop. And then they also have group therapy and social skills groups there as well. So things to know about crisis. So of course, we know responders are the police unless the CSB issues a different type of guidance. Emergency custody order, which is also known as ECO, 24-hour hold for anyone under 18, allows for mental health assessment. Then there's the temporary detention order, the TDO, which is a legal document requiring individuals to receive an immediate hospitalization for further evaluation, as well as for stabilization, which is extremely important, on an involuntary basis until a commitment hearing can be arranged to determine future treatment needs. And that's a 120-hour hold for anyone under 18. If the minor is between the ages of 14 and 18, they will have the option to voluntarily accept or object to the admission to facility for evaluation.
So when we're talking about kind of what a crisis might look like, here on the screen is one how it would be played out. So you have a call for help, be this to your local police department. If you've done anything with VFN, we're always telling you when you have to call the police, request for a CIT officer. They've had this specialized training that helps in time of crisis. So this officer comes, they'll assess your child and kind of decide how to help. If they need to go to have other treatment done, this is how they'll get there. And then they will issue a paperless ECO. A mental health assessment will be done there. And then if it's where they need to be TDO'd, because this is a legal holding, a magistrate is involved into this process. So they would go before a magistrate, and then this is how they are TDO'd. And then while they are at the hospital being kind of assessed and hopefully getting some ways to be kind of help calm the situation, to kind of figure out what next is needed, you have a mental health worker who's looking for a bed. Again, a child can be held for 120 hours under this TDO, and then parents, child, and providers can then determine what next steps look like. Be that they've had some medication management, they get to come home and see their own providers, or do they need more of a long-term need? But again, this team comes together to look at these.
So keep in mind, these are possible paths. This is one pathway. And then what our path looked like in I guess it was 2015, or no, excuse me. 2019 versus 2021 were two completely different paths of like how the crisis happened. I'm going to specifically touch on, because it's the freshest one in my memory, is 2021. So my lived experience of the possible path that could happen is we had known that our son had a history of self-harming tendencies. And in 2021, after visitation with both bio parents, he started to become extremely dysregulated, and to an extreme of dysregulation. I mean, violent, aggressive, hurting himself, screaming, yelling, crying. It was really intense, and it was really scary. We had already experienced a local mental hospital once in 2019, and that was for 7 days. So my son, based on his own lived experience, said, I do not want to go to Dominion, Mom. I do not want to go to the local mental hospital. So I said, okay, well, the option is that we go to Maryfield. Let's go to Maryfield and start there. So that's really the call for help was, we're going to take it upon ourselves. It's not an emergency to call the police, because once he was able to collect his thoughts after, the aggression and the dysregulation, he did agree to go somewhere for help. And that was so thankfully, we didn't have to request a CIT. My husband and I got in a car with him and we drove to Maryfield. That's when the mental health assessment happened with 2 different people in the room. And, my son was very honest and open. And in order to get help with your situation, you have to be honest and open and say what's really going on. And the end of that assessment, the thing that I loved the best at the Maryfield location was they said, what do you feel like you could really use that would help you in this moment? They said, do you think that you need to go to like a full-time mental health facility right now? And he said, no. And they said, well, what do you think you need? And he said, I need somewhere to go that's like not overnight. So he didn't want to go away to a mental health facility that was overnight. What they suggested, which was the next step, was that he tried partial hospitalization, the PHP program at Dominion, and my son agreed to that. Now, the interesting thing about this path is, yes, he agreed to it. However, he did not buy into the program. Within those 2 weeks of the PHP program, his psychiatrist that was overseeing his care actually admitted my son into inpatient. Now, the psychiatrist was the first person, I would say, that actually saw a lot of the challenges that I had been seeing for several years, and actually speaking publicly, speaking to the community, speaking to teachers, speaking to providers. Like, I don't feel like it was ever seen or heard prior to this point. But when there was someone else that was an authoritative figure that was caring for him, and he was responding in a certain way, my son was responding, in a violent, aggressive way and having all of these challenges, that psychiatrist decided to transfer him to and admit him into inpatient care. That's when all of the signs and all of the demeanor and unhealthy coping maladaptive ways that he had created were really seen. And so they kept him there, and they said, unfortunately, we cannot release him back into the public. He needs to go to a higher level of care in a bed-to-bed transfer. That's how serious this is. Now, I'm not sure if that's a typical experience that happens, but the first 2 weeks that he was there, I submitted so higher level of care. Now we're looking at residential placement, and that's based on the advice of a doctor. We did go to FAPT, which is a funding and planning team, and we were denied residential. So this became a parental placement of residential based on a mental health provider's suggestion. We did file for a certificate of need through Medicaid. That's usually called a CON, a CON. And this allowed us to place our son in a residential. When I did call these places for 2 weeks and fill out applications, which if you've ever experienced that, you know how grueling it is, but some of the applications are 20 pages long. I mean, it's a lot of work to do this. And unfortunately, my son, due to his aggression, was denied the first 2 places that I applied for. Now, the third place that I applied for ended up accepting him, but this entire process to get him transferred took me about 29 to 30 days. It was extremely gut-wrenching to know that my son was in a 23-hour lockdown because they only had 1 hour outside, and all the other time was in a building. Straight 23 hours. That's all they did, was they were inside, doors were locked, and their doors to the bedroom weren't locked, but the building is a lockdown facility. And that was excruciating for my husband and I. So even though I was trying as hard as I could to get him admitted into all these other facilities, he just wasn't, stable enough or accepted into these placements. So that can be a something that resists or withholds you from a placement, is the excessive aggression. So eventually we did find a place that accepted him, and then he was placed in because they stated, the psychiatrist stated he needed more long-term care. A 35 or 45 day at a short-term residential was not going to do it. And so he ended up being bed-to-bed transferred. And thankfully, my husband and I were the people that had the ability and were allowed to place him, or so transfer him. So that was a really great experience. We picked him up from Dominion. We came home. He got to see our dog Coda briefly, because he hadn't seen her in he hadn't seen her in the 30 days that he was gone. So he got to see her, and we packed all of his bags. We got everything ready, and then we drove him to the facility, and he spent 6 months there.
All right, so now we're going to do a little bit of planning ahead. So we know when crisis comes, it's never pre-planned. So the thought is how we're going to help you feel most prepared when these things happen, kind of before what can we do, and then after, how this is going to help us with our resiliency also. So we know not every child is going to need crisis intervention services or is going to need to be hospitalized, but there's always the benefit of having a plan just in case something comes up. These situations are extremely stressful, and if you've done other educational things with Virginia Family Network, we talk a lot about having this plan in place, even having numbers and names of people written down, even if this is someone you talk to on a day-to-day basis, because when you're in the middle of it, you're not going to be able to think of things as quickly. So this just kind of helps get the people who need the information as fast as they can. So saying all this is to kind of ensure that families have the information that they need to have to quickly be able to get these services underway. This also includes medical insurance cards and any other information, diagnoses, medication, all of this, to be able to have on hand during a crisis. And then after the crisis, when you're still following up with providers, having this information at hand to be like, these are the new medications that you're sharing.
Just a quick caveat to that. I will say that the first time in 2019, when there was self-harm tendencies visible, we did have to take our child to the medical hospital first. So if your child hurts themselves, with any type of tool and there's wounds, it is extremely important that you take your child to the medical hospital first. And what that looks like, I'll just briefly touch on that because I experienced that as well. Is that just looks like the child being assessed, cared for and treated for the wounds, and then a mental health I want to say social worker speaks to you about your needs. And so that can also happen, and the treatment plan be discussed there. So you wouldn't go directly to a mental health facility if there were any open wounds. You would go to the medical facility first, like a hospital or a clinic or emergency room, and then let them know about the mental health crisis, and that it was, self-inflicted, and then they would assess that. And all different hospitals can be different too, right? So keep that in mind, that of course there's different pathways to that as well too.
And it's absolutely great advice to know that, to make sure that your child is safe and their physical well-being is looked at, and to make sure these injuries or wounds are taken care of. And if you're not sure where to go first, your emergency room is always the best place, because they can kind of do physical and mental pieces at the same time. Emergency rooms, being known for, that's what they do, is they kind of pull the people to you so you can kind of sit there and get things taken care of. Some more tips for families and some questions to ask. So what hospitals will you use for an emergency visit? And much like Bianca's son had said, I don't want to go to this place. Can we go here instead? These are conversations, obviously age appropriate conversations, that you would have with your family, with your child. How will you be transporting there? Is it safe enough that you, as the parents and caregivers, be able to, like, all right, we're just going to go? Or is it way too out of hand and you need either ambulance or police officers to kind of help you transport? And if that's all you need from a police officer's transport, again, that's what they're there for, and they will gladly come just to be the transportation piece. If your child doesn't want to go with you, but you feel like an ambulance isn't really the right route either, ask them, who would you go with? Is it, you want to go with the other caregiver? Do you want to go with, an aunt, an uncle, or someone else who already knows kind of what's going on, so it'd be easy to have them come and help? So who will take care of the other children in the house when you're in a crisis? If you have younger kids who need to stay home while you're dealing with this circumstance, then who would you call? Would it be a grandparent? Would it be a neighbor? And again, when we're talking about these phone numbers and names and kind of the plan that you're putting together, that's already written out in the plan. So if someone is kind of figuring out these first set of questions, who are we going with? How are we getting there? Someone's like, all right, I've already called the neighbor and they're going to be over any minute now to kind of watch the younger kids. And then, are there any friends or family members that can support you during crisis? And not only just to watch the kids or provide rides, but who do you get to talk to at the end? Who do you kind of get to decompress with and talk about things to? So these are just some things to think about. Some more tips for families: to contact the health insurance in case they require that you use a particular hospital. If the particular hospital that they're saying you have to go to is the one that you don't want to go to, there's a way to kind of plead your case of, we've been there, it wasn't helpful, and in this situation, my child is saying, if I have to go there, I'm not going. So instead of making it worse, they understand, they will work with you the best to their ability.
And yeah, and just to point out what, because my son said he didn't want to go to Dominion, he wanted to go to partial hospitalization. There's only like 2 or 3 that exist, and some of them have wait lists. Dominion didn't have a wait list, but we also didn't know like what that timeline would look like, or that he would be admitted. So I will also say there's a shortage of facilities, right? So like, even if your child doesn't want to go to some location, it might happen anyways. And it like, I don't want to go against what our children don't want, but it might be the only option, right? We didn't also know, like, no, one PHP might have been a wait list, the other one's open, that's the place he didn't want to go to, but then that ended up being the place that admitted him. And it's also based on age, right? At the time, he was only 12 years old, and there was no option. There was no, for him, there was no choice. It was up to the adults, the parents, and the providers. And so I just wanted to make that a note too, that even though it might not be somewhere a child wants, that it could still happen, just because that's the only option.
And when we're talking about these different places where we're trying to find help for our kids, again, some of it's age-based. They only take certain ages, or they only take certain diagnoses, or they won't take someone in a full crisis. So they'd have to be at a more stable spot to be there. So there's lots and lots of like moving pieces to all of this. And I think the big thing is having these, again, age-appropriate conversations with your kids about, I know this isn't what you want, but our plan A has a wait list and we don't have wait list options. So we have to go to this place. And then, being honest, hopefully there's a plan where this wouldn't be where you stay for the long term of it, but maybe we could transfer you to somewhere else, or hopefully you, once you get settled and are past the crisis, you're then able to come back out to someplace that's a lot less strict on where you can be, where you can go. You can come home and do things as outpatient, or you can go to a different facility, because now that you're not in crisis, they're able to take you. Lots of conversations have to go on during these times.
Mhm.
Again, we're talking about if you have to use the police, to contact your local police department. When you're not in a crisis, it might be a good idea to kind of introduce yourself to them, especially if you know this might be a not a frequent thing, but more than a once ever thing. So they can kind of flag when your number pops up, it already says CIT officer, no lights and sirens. So they have all these things in, so they know how to come in and already be able to help you the best. I've heard of people who are like, I have made it known to the police department when they send a police officer, they don't have to knock on my door, that just come in and start. Do what you have to do. We don't need an introduction until things are calm. So again, just different things that are going to help your situation better. Write down the names, phone numbers of any of the places that you want to be able to get in contact with, be it different hospitals or different mental health facilities. Do your research about these places. As we have said before, some places only take you if you're not in crisis. Some places already have a wait list. So do your research so you can kind of know, so you're not traveling halfway across the state and they'll be like, but we have this long wait list. We don't know that we can help. So being prepared is very, very helpful.
Great. So I hope you guys realize the reason we're speaking about so many tips for families is because our whole workshop today is based on resiliency. And we believe having a plan, preparing, and knowing what to do in advance is a way to strive for becoming resilient and overcoming your crisis. So when calling about a mental health crisis, it's important to be calm, keep the conversation focused on why the child is not safe, and give clear examples. Have the child's medical information ready and available. Be mindful of the child's presence in the room and what you speak of, and just be mindful and considerate of their feelings. If the police are called to help de-escalate and transport the child, ask for a crisis intervention team, which is also known as a CIT officer. It's definitely important to keep good records. And do the parents need an exchange of information form signed? We know during a crisis, it can be hard to remember details. We encourage families to make a plan that can be easily accessed by everyone, including the medical information, copy of insurance cards, which Nicole mentioned earlier, and important phone numbers and more. And then Nicole, just so that everybody knows, if you would like a copy of this list to help better prepare you, I'm sure Nicole would be happy to forward this information to anyone regarding specific to the tips.
Yeah, we can share kind of this PowerPoint itself, which gives all the great details, but we also have a crisis plan, kind of a worksheet, where it kind of lets you know the things to fill in. And so you know what to have. So, and I can absolutely share that with anyone who would want it to. If you would like that, I will put my email address in the comment section. You guys can just email me. I'd love the tips. I'd love the crisis planning guide, and I can get that sent to you.
Excellent.
So then when we're talking about what resiliency looks like, so the details, as we've been saying all afternoon, they're really important, because not only does it help with this, you're going to have all these follow-ups, and they're going to want to know too, what happened, was medication changed, what situations changed. So knowing this, you're going to want to notify your child's mental health providers and let them know of any changes that have happened. And just to be like, I want to update you. Over the weekend, we had a crisis. This is where we're at now. And I'm going to do my best to keep you in the loop of all of this stuff. And then discuss with your child's teams any steps that can be taken to help prevent these kind of incidents in the future. The team may be able to help. This may just kind of be a time where you need to reflect and start noticing where you may have seen the changes. You may have not noticed it before as a change, but now looking back, like, oh, maybe they were kind of in the room a lot more than they had been weeks prior, or this event happened, which makes sense why they're now feeling this kind of way. So as Bianca was just saying, like, we're telling you all this stuff about crisis as it relates to being resilient, because when crisis happens, it feels like it takes over your whole entire life. And then as you're starting to regain some normalcy and everything is de-escalating, coming back to kind of a baseline, you've learned all these kind of points of things that you already know will help. So these are where you're starting to show your resiliency, because if this happens again and there's a crisis, you already know this is what we need to do. We have this plan in action, go call these people, and then it's easier to kind of plan out who's going to do what, how we're going to get things done. It'll be quicker, it'll be easier to get back to that baseline. So then when you know that you're really being resilient about things, these things happen and you're able to get back to baseline quicker, but you also are like, so in the future, this is what we're going to do to make things even better. Or in the future, these are some things that we're going to put in place. So hopefully this situation never happens again. You're really flexible about the way that you're thinking, be it, I know that going to this place is why my child started having this crisis. We will never do that again, even though it's something that the rest of the family may have liked, or we thought we were doing something really good. Being able to know that as parents and caregivers, that self-care is really important for us, and making that time and then always having hope for the future, hope for others, and being able to still keep some kind of consistency in our life where that's kind of the past. We're still working through that, but future thinking is always how you're going to really show how resilient you can be.
Absolutely. All right, so on this portion, since we're speaking so much about resiliency, I would like to share about the services and supports sort of in a timeline type way of what we experienced prior to the crisis, what we experienced during the crisis, what we experienced after, and then where we are today. And I'm happy to give these in writing, the services and support in writing to Nicole as well. And I did want to ask, is there anyone on live? Do we have any questions so far yet about specifics of what crisis looks like in Virginia? Or if, okay, perfect. So we
Nothing yet.
can move forward onto resiliency and what that looks like. So in 2019, when we became a part of the system, Community Services Board, we had the outpatient therapy and psychiatric support. Our family self-referred to the Children's Services Act, which is also known as the CSA, and we became part of a family resource meeting, which is an FRM. We had support at the school with an IEP planning, which is individual education plan. I was supported by a family support partner myself, and we worked with several providers on our team with safety plans. So that was in 2019. At that time, the first placement for treatment was only 7 days, and which means the level of the stabilization occurred so quickly, and that it wasn't extreme where he only needed an outpatient therapist and a psychiatrist, and I had a family support partner, and we had the monthly FRNs just to check in. Once things escalated and got to the extreme placement of residential in 2021, we did become part of a higher level of need. So there is different levels of the community service workers. There's a level 1, a level 2, and I believe a level 3 based on where you are in your family. So in 2019, when he went to Dominion for 7 days, we were like maybe level 1 or level 2, and we did have a case manager through the CSB, but we weren't high level of care at the CSB. So we did not have, we weren't emergency, or we didn't have high services. All we had was 2 things: outpatient therapy and psychiatrist. And then the family support partner was for my husband and I. In 2022, after residential discharges, the services drastically changed through the CSB and the Children's Services Act. We had intensive in-home support, which was 3 times a week. We had a parent coach, which was weekly, and these 2 providers came to our home. We had equine therapy, and mind you, this is 2022, so after the pandemic, but they still came to our home. Equine therapy was weekly, and we drove to the facility for that. We had a medication management provider, which was monthly. And then we were on a wait list for outpatient therapy, which was specific to the type of treatment my son needed, which was trauma and attachment therapy. And all of this was provided funding by the CSA, the Children's Services Act. The only thing we used insurance for was medication management. And I believe we also, for intensive in-home, used our insurance as well. And that was Medicaid, because our son is a former foster child. He has Medicaid. So now in 2023, 2 years after the initial crisis, what does services look like, and what is resiliency, and what it takes to overcome all of these challenges? So we do have, finally, after 3 to 4 months of on a wait list for trauma and attachment outpatient therapy, we do that weekly now. We do have a youth support partner, which is very new in Fairfax County, and it just started at the beginning of this year, which was in January, February timeframe. And that service provider is strictly a person with lived experience herself that works with the youth, and that person works with my son twice a week. We still have a parent coach, which we've had since April of 2022, and we're just now closing out that service at the end of this month. We'll have ABA therapy. We just had an ABA assessment 2 to 3 weeks ago, and that will be 3 times a week, which is Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 2 hours at a time. We continue to have medication management, which is monthly, and that service has been in our lives since our child was probably 7 years old. So that's just a long-term service care that we will have for a long time. We are currently on a wait list for full neurological testing, with autism spectrum being the main focus at Kennedy Krieger Institute, which is the Center for Autism Related Disorders. We are currently on a wait list for the DD waiver as well. However, unfortunately, we have to have a full neurological psych and where he is on the spectrum assessment in order to be on the DD waiver in the state of Virginia. So right now, that's really what our services and support looks like. And I wanted to really focus on where we were in 2019 and what that looked like, and how much advocacy it took as well to get to that point. Because prior to residential, when I knew that there was all these challenges and self-harm, suicidal ideations, and all of these things, as a mother, something's not right. Like, I need more support than I'm getting. Things aren't working. We're just repeating cycles. We're repeating patterns. We're repeating behavior that doesn't work for us, and it doesn't feel safe. And after continued advocacy and really just demanding additional support, is now we have a full concoction of services and supports in place that are actually making a difference in not only my son's life, but in my entire family's life. And, the services that I had explained that were in 2023 in the present moment, it can be about 15 to 20 hours a week. Sometimes it's not always that high. Sometimes it's 10 hours. It depends on the week. When ABA starts, it'll be about that again. And I have recently took a leave of absence from all of my jobs, because it is a full-time job, almost as a case managerial type duty as a parent. And it's important that our health and wellness as a family and our son's life also is a extreme priority. And so I'm not encouraging everyone to do that. I'm just saying that's what I had to do, because it is genuinely like a full-time job. And thankfully, my beautiful husband that's pictured here, Brian is our full-time provider, and he knows his role is to financially and just kind of be my moral support for all of the hard work I'm doing at home and making sure that all the services are in place for our family. And we both respect each other's roles and know we're at this moment doing what we have to do. Even after a crisis, we still are, working really hard to maintain it, because in the stages of change, maintenance is the main thing, self-efficacy and maintenance, right? And then after that there's always the possibility of relapse. So we're really just trying to prevent that.
So some final thoughts. I know we've gone over a lot of stuff this afternoon, and again, we are more than willing to share the PowerPoints and our crisis planning guide, and you can ask any questions that you need. If I don't know the answers, I always know how to get a hold of Bianca, so she can help me figure things out too. But we want you to keep in mind that every family's situation is different. There was a lot of examples I was giving that were very kind of book-based and like how it would look if you never had anything happen. And Bianca was wonderfully able to give us like, this is some lived experience and what it looked like for her and her family. No matter what happens, remember to trust your gut. You are the expert of your child. Um, if conflicts arise with professionals that you're working with, um, and it's okay to kind of be like, we need to find someone else. We need to find what's best for our family. It may be hard to kind of stick to the facts and give clear examples, to keep your emotions out of it. This is also why someone like a family support partner is really useful during these times, because they can help you keep things clear and straight. If you don't have a family support partner, bringing in those natural resources of other family members and friends that can help you through these. Ask all the questions that you can. There are no wrong questions. There is no wrong time for a question. Whatever questions you have, bring them up. And if you're at home sometime and you don't know who to ask the question to, write them down. So the next time you see someone, like, thought about this the other day. What about whatever your question is? So they can kind of help you get through that. Um, Write out a planning guide, or again, we have one that I am more than willing to share to kind of help get things in track and pointed in the right direction. Do you have any other final thoughts that we haven't covered?
There is one thing specific to when you're in a conflict, and I've been hearing this word a lot. So basically, when you're in conflict and your brain either goes into fight, flight, or freeze, and that's for any person that's in the conflict or crisis. You don't have to have trauma this is a natural brain response that happens when our brain is triggered or activated into that fight, or freeze state. Our brain has this ability called, it's a very fancy, gigantic word called confabulation. And our brain creates, has it has an ability to create and fill in blanks that might have been, and also switch around timelines. And so a lot of the things that were happening in crisis with my son and we were going into conflict and crisis, and both of us were going into fight. But when you're in this state of fight, you don't really have the ability to remember all the details because you're activated. Your brain is activated and not present, which we call that the window of tolerance. And that's where your mind is at a state of calmness. And so it does, I saw it all over this PowerPoint, is stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. The only challenge is when you're in a state of crisis and your brain immediately goes to fight, you really don't always have control over what your brain does, but also what your brain remembers. I highly encourage video cameras set up in the house after we started noticing that it was he said, she said conflict in our house. And there was well, I didn't really remember what was happening because I was in a state of crisis, or my husband or my son didn't remember and he was in crisis. It was really both of us going at it because both of our brains didn't remember what was happening. We couldn't recall the details. So we got cameras installed in our community areas, the living room, the kitchen, just to, because that's where a lot of the conflicts and challenges were happening. But I will say, I know it is hard to stay calm during situations. I would just encourage you to learn a little bit more about what the brain does during crisis that you don't have control over. And confabulation, like I said, I know it's a super fancy word, but it's really a thing that all of us experience. And once you do some research on that, you might have a little bit of aha moments within your own family dynamic. So other than that, I feel like we shared a lot of information today. I feel like we shared some helpful tips. The lived experience is still, I'm able to share it now without, getting super emotional, but it still impacts my everyday life. And but I was just happy to be here. And you know, the whole purpose of my story, I would say, is to help people overcome their crises. And you know, sometimes we have to go through really hard things just to be able to help other people.
So before I let you go, I do have one question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
We know you do a lot with Virginia Family Network. You help me with lunch and learns, and you are an advanced parent leadership training teacher. There's some upcoming trainings that you're like, sign me up, I want to teach. Knowing all this, how is sharing your experience with others helped your resilience?
It's helped me stay alive. It's helped me feel alive. Because I know that when I am sharing my story, and even when I'm doing direct service work and I have a person and I briefly touch on what I've experienced, it gives them the freedom to open up as well. And to know that they don't have to be alone and sit with their experiences by themselves, and that there's people out there that are really willing to, you know, relate to them, listen, validate feelings. And it's also made me a better person. You know, I've always known that I was empathetic, but being a family support partner and a peer recovery specialist has made me learn different ways of showing empathy. And so that keeps me on my toes of, even when you think you know all the things about empathy or showing support to other people, I'm still learning every day about how to be a better person, and not just in work, just everyday life experiences. So I would say it's rewarding work because it keeps me on my toes. It's kept me wanting to keep moving forward, doing the hard work, so that when somebody has to go through their hard work, that I have a ton of tools that I'm willing to share. And it gives me a sense of worth and purpose.
Perfect.
And that's
So,
why I do all those things you just said.
so for anyone watching this, if you are at a point where you've been through stuff and you're like, I really want to share what I've been through because I don't want anyone else to have to struggle like I do, or to feel alone in all of this, or I want to just be able to share these details of and these tips that I've come up with doing this, reach out. We have, again, the advanced parent leadership training, which kind of gets you set up to be this parent leader and do these things. There's an advisory board that's Virginia Family Network is basically governed by. You kind of help me make the big decisions because I don't make decisions. So all these ways where you can really start doing things. If there is something you want to share and this looks like something you'd want to help do, again, reach out and we can kind of get you started on your path to being a parent leader and really being able to strengthen your resiliency through everything that you and your family has come through.
And I do want to say it's a paid, a lot of the direct service that I'm speaking about, this is sharing your story is a paid position. Doing the direct service, working one-on-one with families, public speaking. Also, there's opportunities to share your story as well, either with NAMI or with, you know, other affiliates. So think about it that way. You can make a career out of this with sharing your story. You just have to be at a place that you're ready to share it, and, you know, at a place emotionally ready.
So I want to thank everyone for spending your lunch with us. I want to thank Bianca for sharing everything and being so willing to open up about her family and how they've gotten through everything, how resilient and strong they really are, and all the great work that you do with us all the time.
Thank you. Or do we have any other slides? I couldn't remember.
Um,
There were
uh,
a couple.
so we do have resources. And again, if you want a copy of this, I will make sure that all of these resources are live and clickable for you. So we have some state resources, we have some national resources. And then again, we just want to
That's who we are.
everyone. All right, so if you have any questions that come up, please feel free to reach out to me. And as I said before, if there are things that I don't have answers to, I have a whole plethora of wonderful parent leaders, and I know who to reach out to when I need assistance. And again, Bianca, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me here.